Major funding for KPBS Evening Edition has been made possible in part by Bill Howe Family of Companies, providing San Diego with plumbing, heating and air, restoration, flood and remodeling services for over 40 years. Call 1-800-BILL-HOWE or visit billhowe.com. And by the Conrad Prebys Foundation, Darlene Marco Shiley, and by the following. And by viewers like you. Thank you.
We've been watching San Diego rent prices rise for many months. Now the trend may be changing. Thanks for joining us. I'm Maya Trabulsi. A new real estate report says the city is the 7th most expensive in the country for renters. But as KPBS reporter Melissa May tells us, it's not all bad news.
The new report from Zumper puts the median rental price for a one-bedroom apartment in San Diego at $2,460 a month. For a two-bedroom, it's $3,260.
And just to give a little bit of perspective, we also calculate national one and two beds as well. The national one bed's at $1,511, and the national two beds are at $1,865. So San Diego is considerably more expensive than the national median.
Zumper's Crystal Chen says those prices come from the company's rental marketplace and from other listing services.
We aggregate data from over 1 million active listings to calculate the median asking rents for our top 100 cities for this specific rent report.
Chen says rents are now much higher than they were before the pandemic, but they found a slight drop in the last year.
One beds are down 6% year over year, and two beds are down about 5% year over year. So I think that seeing that rents are down show that, perhaps there was a rent ceiling that people were willing to pay to live in San Diego, and that was hit.
What we're seeing is a leveling off of the rents.
Lucinda Lilly is the past president of the Southern California Rental Housing Association.
The rents are not increasing at the rate that they were increasing last year and the year before. We feel like what I'm seeing is that people have kind of caught up a little bit.
Chen says there's a record number of supply that's supposed to hit the market this year, so that may also help the rental prices in San Diego. Melissa May, KPBS News.
It's been 100 years since San Diego adopted single-family zoning laws. Coming up, how that created racial divides in neighborhoods that persist to this day. Seniors with certain Medicare plans will soon have to find different doctors through Scripps Health. Doctors with Scripps Clinic and Scripps Coastal Medical Groups will no longer be in-network for individual Medicare Advantage plans next year. In a statement to KPBS, Scripps said the revenue from those plans doesn't cover the cost of the patient care it provides. Around 32,000 patients will be affected by the change. Both medical groups will continue to accept original Medicare plans, and Scripps says Medicare Advantage plans may continue to be accepted by doctors in other affiliated medical groups, allowing patients to continue to receive care at Scripps hospitals. And starting next week, San Diego County judges will be accepting petitions for Care Court. It's a new program aimed at helping secure long-term treatment for individuals with severe mental health concerns. KPBS health reporter Matt Hoffman has more on how it works.
San Diego County leaders are previewing what Care Court will look like. 7 counties are starting their pilot programs in October. Family members, treatment providers, and first responders are among those who can petition the court for an adult to have a treatment plan. There's a narrow focus for eligibility. It's designed for San Diegans living with untreated schizophrenia or other psychotic disorders.
It is important to note that this is not an emergency court, and it is not intended to be utilized as a crisis service. It is very much a process.
Treatment programs would last up to a year with an option to extend it out another year. County officials anticipate about 1,000 petitions to be made over the next year, with around 250 of those actually qualifying.
The most important metric of success, I would say, for the CARE Act program would be among folks who are petitioned in, how many can we engage in care without a case being established at all?
Participation in Care Court is voluntary, meaning just because a family member makes a petition for a loved one to get treatment, they wouldn't be forced into it. A judge reviews petitions, and then a hearing is set to come up with a care plan.
Our court will strive to make CARE Act proceedings a success. We are committed to this success.
This is a dynamic of trying to, engage people in long-term or continuous care to interrupt cycles of crisis response and needs for crisis services.
Homelessness is not an eligibility requirement, and it's unclear how many unsheltered residents could qualify for Care Court. However, state funding has been secured for housing should those in treatment need it. Officials maintain Care Court is not a pathway to conservatorship if someone refuses services.
I think all of the parties agree that Care Court is a separate, voluntary attempt to engage people at a time when a therapeutic alliance is necessary for the purposes of getting a better outcome for them, whereas a conservatorship is usually considered to be almost the last possible attempt to protect a person from themselves.
Petition applications for Care Court can be found at sdcourt.ca.gov/CareAct. Matt Hoffman, KPBS News.
2 aging schools have transformed into an advanced education complex in the heart of City Heights. They were dedicated today in a ceremony that brought back one of the school's former principals, who is now a national leader. KPBS education reporter MG Perez was there.
With the lyrics of a classic Spanish folk song, these dual-language pre-K students welcomed a new era for Central Elementary School and the Wilson Middle School next door. The City Heights campuses started as one building and a 2-story schoolhouse in the late 1920s and 30s. Decades later, the Central Elementary principal had a dream.
When you dream big, you got to believe something into being. And those people that need to see it to believe it, I hope they're here today because they can see it.
Cindy Martin was Central Elementary's principal before she went on to become San Diego Unified Superintendent, and then the appointment as U.S. Deputy Secretary of Education. She came back home today to dedicate this $150 million state-of-the-art rebuilt education complex. A dream come true that started with students collecting lucky pennies in a jar and then got funded with bond money. Olivia Chin is still a speech therapist at Central who trusted Martin's dream from the beginning.
You can see her fingerprint all over the campus, how she thought about all of our students, including our students with special needs. So it's just a dream come true, yeah.
That includes middle school students from the Wilson side of the education complex, who will now work on their own dreams. 8th grader Vanessa Jimenez leads a scientist team that calls themselves the Roarbotics.
I've always seen the movies where people control robots or even build like those human-sized robots, and I really thought that was really cool, and I was like, I want to do that.
So the 2 campuses are now connected in a way like never before. That connection honors a man who was not only important to the community, but the school district as well.
Nobody should live in a community without trying to leave it a little bit better than what it was when they found it.
The Reverend George Walker Smith was the first African American to be elected to office in San Diego County when he won a seat on the Board of Education in 1963. That was the beginning of a distinguished career in education and leadership in the fight for civil rights.
He set the path for many of us, and we should not take that lightly. And so I'm honored as a black man, as an educator, to follow in those footsteps.
Now open, the George Walker Smith Education Center has 7 new buildings, more than 147,000 square feet of additional education space, a performing arts center, and a modern playground for these students to play and keep dreaming. MG Perez, KPBS News.
I'm Ariella Scalise. Tonight, temperatures will be dropping down to the 60s under a partly cloudy sky. But coming up, we'll talk more about a cooling trend on the way, some gusty winds in the desert and mountains, and even some drizzle and some light showers possible. I'll have the details straight ahead.
San Diego organizers are training community members how to file complaints against police officers. KPBS reporter Katie Heisen has more.
Tasha Williamson taught herself how to file complaints against San Diego police.
A police officer can take your life, take your freedom, change the trajectory of your household in one instance, and you don't think that the public should know their behaviors?
She now trains others or files on their behalf. How many has she filed?
I think maybe 100.
She says the paper trail is vital. Complaints can add up to an officer getting fired or make it harder for them to get a job in other police departments. She says it puts pressure on officers to change their behavior. Williamson says it's important to file not just directly with the law enforcement agency, but also with their Oversight Commission and the state's Police Standards Commission.
Community members are finding their voices. They're tired. You know, you can harm someone so much that they will either run away or not deal with it, or they'll stand up and fight for themselves. And part of complaining is the community standing up, fighting for itself.
This year, the State Commission gained the power to decertify officers for serious misconduct. They anticipate removing thousands of officers from the profession each year. Katie Hyson, KPBS News.
You can find more information on how to file a complaint on our website, kpbs.org. Congress is deeply divided, and if a deal to fund the government isn't reached by the end of the week, the American people will likely feel the effects. Karen Kafa is in Washington with the latest.
If Congress can't reach a deal to continue funding the government by this weekend, federal operations deemed non-essential will come to a halt. While some of the nearly 4 million federal workers will stay on the job, others will be furloughed, unpaid until the shutdown ends.
1 week without a paycheck could be devastating because people struggle.
During the 2019 shutdown, hundreds of TSA officers called out from work, many of them to find other ways to make money.
There are going to be some people, depending on how long the shutdown goes, who can't afford to get to work.
Fewer TSA agents could mean longer security lines in the short term, with the possibility of more travel troubles in the long term.
It stops us from training and hiring air traffic controllers. What that means is, over time, more shortages, more outages, more potential disruptions.
If your destination is a national park or a federally operated museum like the Smithsonian, you may not be allowed in if the facilities are forced to close. Meanwhile, maintenance of food, air, water, and workplace safety also likely to take a hit. Agencies tasked with upholding protections like OSHA, the FDA, and the EPA would pull back operations. People who rely on federal aid like housing or food assistance and even student loans may experience disruptions. A shutdown also putting U.S. credit on the line as ratings agencies consider whether investing in the U.S. government is still a safe bet. In Washington, I'm Karen Kafa.
I'm Jeff Bennett. Tonight on the NewsHour, former White House aide Cassidy Hutchinson speaks out about her time in the Trump administration. Coming up at 7 after Evening Edition on KPBS.
After 148 days of striking, it may once again be lights, camera action in Hollywood soon. Leaders with the Writers Guild of America unanimously voted in favor of its members going back to work. The tentative contract with major studios includes stronger benefits, protections against the use of AI, and guarantees for streaming compensation. But it still needs to be ratified by members, and Hollywood actors are still on the picket line.
Even if this deal goes through, we still have to get the actors paid.
We'll have to give a little bit in these negotiations as well as receive. So, you know, as long as it's better than it has been.
Economists say the strikes have already had a more than $5 billion effect on the overall U.S. economy. If you own a Hyundai or Kia vehicle, you might want to check for recalls. Regulators say several models can catch fire even when the engine is turned off. The automakers suggest parking outside and away from buildings. The recalls cover more than 3 million cars and SUVs from 2010 through 2017. The companies say they haven't received reports of injuries or deaths. San Diego adopted single-family zoning 100 years ago. KPBS reporter Katie Hyson looked into the racist origins of zoning and how its effects continue today.
Well, surely, if you could... As a child, Ricardo Flores moved away from apartment-filled City Heights, where his extended family lived, to the relative quiet of single-family homes in Rancho San Diego. Flores says he stuck out.
In my neighborhood, it was pretty much white kids, and I was the only black or brown person. And then when I'd go visit my cousins, it was only people of color.
At the time, he never questioned why that was. He thinks most people don't.
We honestly probably don't even understand how we're living here and others are living over there. We just assume that it's because we went to college, we worked hard, our parents did the same. But in reality, it's much deeper than that. It's much more sinister than that, actually.
Sinister, Flores says, because that separation between people of color and white people was intentional. Berkeley created one of the first zoning laws in 1916. White neighbors wanted to push out 2 Japanese-owned laundries, a Chinese-owned laundry, and a dance hall mostly used by black people. So they enforced residential zoning in those locations. A year later, the Supreme Court ruled racial zoning unconstitutional. But in some ways, it didn't matter. Single-family zoning worked just as well to segregate. San Diego adopted it in 1923. In some neighborhoods, developers can build apartments or duplexes, affordable to non-white residents who tend to be less wealthy. The rest of residential land is restricted to less affordable single-family homes. Planners managed to segregate San Diego without saying the word race. Berkeley researchers wanted to understand the impact of the last 100 years of zoning in San Diego, so they categorized every plot in the city. Turns out, single-family only zoning takes up most of the residential land. 81%. Those areas are wealthier and whiter with higher home prices, and they engage in something researcher Samir Gambier calls resource hoarding.
The non-single family zones have fewer resources, fewer good schools, and large commute times, and that really restricts the wealth generation.
Under zoning, zip codes became powerful predictors of someone's education, income, health, even how long they live. Cities across the country have voted to end single-family zoning in recent years, including Berkeley. But Gambier's co-researcher, Joshua Cantong, says it's an uphill battle.
I don't know if we can underestimate how powerful homeowner resistance is to retaining single-family zoning. Because generally, white, affluent, male, older constituents are more involved in planning processes.
In other words, it's often white, wealthy homeowners who can go to city meetings and argue their side. Flores says the reasons they give for pushback have changed over the years.
First, it was, you're in a fire hazard. No, that's not true. You're going to destroy land values. No, that's not true.
He says the main argument now is that it will change the quote-unquote character of neighborhoods.
You're going to change the look of my neighborhood. What I would wonder is, are they talking about the buildings? Because we can replicate buildings.
The buildings, he questions, or the people? Regardless of the reasons, Flores says San Diego, exploding with population growth, can't afford to hold on to old zoning restraints.
Here we are 1.3 million, and we have this antiquated zoning policy. And we see it in homelessness. We see it in skyrocketing housing prices, over $1 million. We see it in segregation.
He fought for a proposal to end single-family zoning in about half of San Diego, but the Planning Commission voted in August to hold it back for workshopping. He says it could create affordable housing for middle-income earners, free up existing apartments for lower-income earners, limit urban sprawl, and slow climate change. And, he says, it could finally fulfill a goal of the civil rights movement: integration.
We have a segment of our society that does not grow up with people of color. And then they achieve power and other status, and they reinforce those bad decisions because they don't grow up with people that are different than them.
Flores plans to continue rallying support for the proposal before bringing it back to the commission. Katie Hyson, KPBS News.
San Diegans will see some money back on next month's utility bill. San Diego gas and electric residential customers will see a $60.70 credit on their October statement, and that's courtesy of the California Climate Credit Program. It's a part of the state's effort to fight climate change. Community choice aggregation customers will get the same rebate. No action is required to receive the credit. Since billing cycles vary, not every customer will see the credit at the same time. Winter is coming, but not just any winter. An El Nino winter is headed our way. Climate scientists say it has the potential to upend our already wild weather expectations. Mike Valerio has a brief breakdown of what may be in store.
This year, scientists are watching a rapidly developing and strengthening El Nino event. It's a natural climate pattern, typically every 2 to 7 years, bringing warmer than average sea surface temperatures to the equatorial Pacific Ocean. That warming can influence our winter weather.
The effects of El Nino are pretty pronounced across a lot of the continent and really a lot of the world.
Dr. Daniel Swain, a UCLA climate scientist, explains El Nino is not just a Pacific story. The phenomenon typically leads to warmer and drier conditions in northern sections of the U.S., with cooler and wetter weather across southern stretches of the country. After California endured a winter of relentless atmospheric river systems, El Nino likely means more winter storms this coming January through March could be on the way.
I think there is a tilt in the odds towards a wetter than average winter, especially in southern and central California, as well as other parts of the interior southwestern U.S.
Dr. Swain adds El Nino could mean an unusually dry winter in the Pacific Northwest and Hawaii, where we've seen wildfires like the devastation in August in Lahaina. But a curveball in this year's El Nino predictions, how the abnormally warm water across the rest of the world's oceans could change how El Nino impacts us.
The global oceans outside of the El Nino zone in the tropics are also extremely warm. And so that combination is something we haven't seen before.
I'm Mike Valerio reporting.
Looking at our weather headlines as we are tracking a cooling trend beginning as we head into our Thursday. Some gusty mountain and desert winds, and we'll be tracking some drizzles or even some light showers as we head into the weekend. Heading into tonight, temperatures will be dropping down into the 50s at Oceanside, Borrego Springs down to 66, Mount Laguna 57, and San Diego down to 63. Into the day on Thursday we go with comfortable conditions through a lot of the southwest, so a great day to get outside and enjoy. Look at temperatures as we head into the day on Thursday with 73 in San Diego, Oceanside 76, Chula Vista 73, and Borrego Springs your temperatures into the upper 90s, Mount Laguna into the upper 60s. What can we expect throughout the day on Friday? Well, those windier conditions in parts of the deserts and the mountains as we head into the end of our week. Otherwise, things stay dry, but look at Northern California, cooler conditions and some showers following a front moving on through. Now, as we look at things through the next couple of hours, we are going to be watching some of those low clouds building in the next couple evenings and mornings, so that may impact the start of your day, and could even see again some light drizzle moving through as we head into the weekend. Look at this, a bit of rain along the coast for Saturday and Sunday, temperatures into the lower 70s, and then we climb right back up with more sunshine as we do head into the start of our week. Inland we go, and we'll be dry and warm throughout our Thursday, but that cooling trend on the way. Friday 75, and look at that, over the weekend we'll be watching some mist and some clouds lingering further inland, and then we dry out for a nicer start to next week. Into the mountains as things will get a bit breezy and a big dip in temperatures coming. Look at the weekend, only into the 50s. Overnight lows dropping to the 30s Saturday and a high of only 48 on Sunday. The deserts will have some breezy conditions, but also will feature some cooling conditions here as we head into the weekend. 81 on Saturday and only 77 on Sunday. For KPBS News, I'm Ariella Scalise.
Bruce Springsteen won't be coming to San Diego this year after all. The 74-year-old musician announced today he has canceled his shows for the rest of 2023 as he recovers from peptic ulcer disease. Rescheduled dates will be announced next week, and venues will not change, and that includes a show at Pechanga Arena originally scheduled for December. Ticket holders who can't make the new dates have 30 days to request a refund. San Diego researchers say a boost in the number of southern white rhinos living in the wild is a positive sign that conservation is working. KPBS environment reporter Eric Anderson has more on the efforts underway.
The International Union for the Conservation of Nature and Nature Resources report says the population of the threatened rhinos increased for the first time in a decade. The study found the population climbed more than 5.5% over the last year, and that happened as poaching continues to be a problem. The study credits conservation efforts.
These numbers give us hope and make us realize that these efforts are being successful. And that generates more interest in these efforts and more support for these efforts. So it's a nice circle, an increasing circle of awareness and support.
Durant is actively working to revive the northern white rhino. Only 2 females past their breeding age remain alive. The San Diego Zoo Wildlife Alliance is preparing female southern white rhinos to carry a northern white embryo created from frozen genetic material.
There are now 3 or 4 groups in the world that are working on this project, and some embryos have been produced. No embryo transfers have been successful. Very few have been attempted. Embryo transfer is a very complex procedure in itself.
Durant hopes using proven mothers in San Diego will increase chances a northern white rhino can be born, even if that happens after the species goes extinct. Durant says there is enough frozen genetic material to create a diverse living herd. Eric Anderson, KPBS News.
And here's a look at what we're working on for tomorrow in the KPBS newsroom. NPR's Morning Edition has a story on a bill passed by California lawmakers to ban caste discrimination and why it's still waiting for the governor's approval. And then on Midday Edition has the weekend preview with KPBS Arts producer Julia Dixon-Evans for events that are happening around San Diego. And you can find tonight's stories on our website, kpbs.org. Thanks for joining us. I'm Maya Trabulsi. Good night.
Major funding for KPBS Evening Edition has been made possible in part by Bill Howe Family of Companies, providing San Diego with plumbing, heating and air, restoration, flood and remodeling services for over 40 years. Call 1-800-BILL-HOWE or visit billhowe.com. And by the Conrad Prebys Foundation, Darlene Marco Shiley, and by the following. By viewers like you. Thank you.